So now it's time that we begin evaluating monolith architecture and microservices. Okay. So what I've done over here is I would be having few diagrams over here, and I've taken an example of an e-commerce website or application. Okay. So the concepts that you understand over here, you can apply it to any sort of application. Okay. This is just an example that I've taken. So let's say you have an application that you're building, and you have different modules. Now every application has some modules. So in an e-commerce application, the modules you're going to have is like products, category, dashboards, and orders and payments, right? Now when it comes to monolith architecture, okay, what you're going to have is you're going to have a single service or a single application comprising of all these modules within that application, right? And all these applications code base will be within a single service that needs to be deployed, a single code base that needs to be maintained. And it is going to have a single database that this application is going to talk to. So you can see this database over here. It is going to talk to this single database. So all the modules are talking to this single database. Now, of course, within this database, different modules might have different kinds of tables that would be created and they would be using. But the database ultimately they are using is the same. Okay. Now, this is monolith architecture. Now, when it comes to microservices, what are microservices? So here I have the same application built using microservices architecture. So here you can see over here, I have individual services. So this entire application is broken down into individual services, as you can see over here, which is the product service, dashboard service. Then you have category. You have orders and payments, and all these services are independent code bases. They are their own app, it's an application in itself. Every service is an application in itself. Okay, they are going to have code base independent of others. So products is going to have the code base that will be independent, and dashboard, category, orders and payments will do the same. And they are going to have their own respective database servers that they will be interacting with, as you can see over here, right? So products is talking to this products database, okay? Dashboard is talking to this dashboard database, category has its own, and orders and payments will have its own. Now, if there are multiple, or if there are additional modules or more modules that come up, they are going to come in the form of different services. But when it comes to monolith, you're going to have the same application add and maintain all the other modules that are being added. Okay, so this is what a monolith application is, and this is what microservices is. Now let us talk about both of them. Okay, we are going to evaluate both of them and understand both of them with respect to a few points over here. So I've written a few points over here so that it's easier to discuss. Now first thing is code base. So what is code base? So code base means the entire code of the applications. How is that structured? Okay, so here when it comes to monolith application, the single application will have the code base for all the modules. Like for example, it is going to have the code base for products, category, dashboard, and everything will be there in a single code base. But when it comes to microservices is going to have different code bases for different services. Okay, and this basically has pros and cons. So both the approaches has pros and cons, and depending on your organization needs, okay, it's better for you to evaluate. Okay, let me talk about some pros and cons. So here, when it comes to monolith, you have a single code base. So what is the benefit? You get started quickly. Of course, less maintainability. There are lesser things to maintain. There is only one code base. You quickly get starting with writing code. You just have to manage and maintain one code base. When it comes to deployment, you deploy that one code base only, right? So it's easy to get started. And if you're a small company, it's best to start as monolith, right? But when it comes to microservices, what happens when it comes to microservices? With microservices, you have multiple code bases for each service. And as a result, you'll need more devs, right? Because workload increases. You will have multiple code bases to manage. Like you will have to figure out a deployment pipeline and all of that. Okay, databases are also separate, so it adds additional overhead. But some organizations, if they have outgrown monolith architecture and they want to be much more scalable, then they prefer microservices architecture, because they have a popular app that is being used by a lot of users. Whereas if you're a small startup, and if you're building something with limited scale, you should go ahead with Monolith. Okay. So coming back to the point, I was talking about the code base structure. So code base structure is for Monolith, it's going to be a single code base that is going to have the controllers, services, the databases, the database related code, and even the jar files. Everything is going to be a single code base. Okay. But when it comes to microservices, we are going to like have multiple code bases for the same. Okay. So yeah, that's about the code bases. Let us talk about next point, which is deployment model. Okay, deployment model meaning how are you going to deploy the application. Now, when it comes to Monolith application, you have to just deploy a single application, right? There is one code base that you're managing, maintaining, and there will be one jar file. Now, if your Monolith application increases in size, okay, it increases, there are a lot more modules, then the size of the deployment also increases. Okay. And what happens over here is if let's say there is a bug in category module, so you have to deploy the entire application. You cannot just deploy a category module, right? But when it comes to microservices, so microservices, what happens is you have individual services over here like this, right? And when it comes to deployment, you have to deploy all the services for the first time. And if you're upgrading all the services or doing anything, you have to upgrade all of them and redeploy all of them. So that is how it works. Okay. But let's say there is a bug in category service, for example. So you don't have to deploy the rest of the services. You have to just deploy the category service. So deploying category service might be a little bit lighter as compared to deploying the whole application here when it comes to Monolith. Because when you're deploying Monolith application, you are not only just deploying category service, you're deploying all the other modules as well, right? So the deployment will be a larger deployment, right? But when it comes to microservices, it will be a smaller one because you are just deploying a single service, and the things are a little bit quick over here because the developer might not touch other services. He'll just touch category service, quickly fix the bug and deploy it. That is how it's going to work. And if it's a smaller service, then things become even more faster. But that's not the case with Monolith's approach. With Monolith approach, you have to deploy the entire application. There will be release cycles. Okay. So release cycles are there in both the approaches. Okay. But in microservices, the release cycles can be faster because you are just deploying category module, right? So this is about deployment module. Then let's talk about scalability. Now, when you're building a production grade application, there will be scenarios wherein your application is facing high traffic or high usage. For example, if you're building an e-commerce website, let's say there is a big billion-day sale or any big sale going on. In that particular case, let's say one module in your particular application is being used a lot. For example, orders and payments is being used a lot, or search is a separate module and that is being used a lot. Now, if you want to scale just that part of the application, it's not possible to do that in Monolith application. Okay. If you want to allocate more power, more servers, and you want to scale that particular module, you cannot do that in Monolith application. But when it comes to microservices, let's say you have a search service, right? I have not created that service. And let's say you have a search service and people are searching a lot on your website. There is some sale going on. There is some campaign going on. And let's say there is a surge in traffic. You realize that and you see like the APIs are becoming slower. What you can do is you can just scale that service, search service. You don't need to touch other services. You just scale that services and things are taken care of. Now, once the traffic is down and back to normal, you can scale down that service as well, right? So, of course, this is one of the benefits when it comes to microservices, wherein you can, instead of going all in one scaling, like scaling the entire application, like you will have to do in Monolith. So in Monolith, if you have a search module and if it's experiencing higher traffic, you'll have to scale the entire module, like all the other modules, right? But here, you have an option to only scale search. So that's the benefit here, So this is about scalability, okay? Technology stack feasibility. Okay, this is a very beautiful one. I love talking about this. Now, when you're building Monolith application, okay, when you start building any application, you have to choose your technology stack. Okay, with Monolith application, let's say you choose Java. Okay, now you're locked in Java's ecosystem. Okay, it's a good thing to use Java, by the way, but you have to use Java for rest of the modules as well because it's a single application. It's not an independent service that you're building over here. Right? It's a single application that you're building. But when it comes to microservices, you're not locked in. Okay, so let's say tomorrow, if you want to introduce reporting service, so what will happen here in Monolith? You will add one more module over here, which will be reporting service, right? It will come something like this, reporting. Okay, and I'll call it reporting. Okay, but when it comes to, so let me take this inside like so. Okay, so let's say we have this reporting service. Now, reporting service also has to be written in Java, of course, because it's part of Monolith application. You cannot change the technology stack. But here, let's say tomorrow reporting service is supposed to be introduced. Okay, what you can do over here is you can make sure that reporting service has its own technology stack chosen. So this is reporting service. Now here you have the flexibility of choosing the stack. Okay, so let's say for database, you don't want to use SQL database. You want to make use of NoSQL. Of course, you can do that. And for the service, let's say you don't want to use Java. You want to use Node.js and you have the availability of Node.js in your company. So why not go ahead with Node.js over here? That is complete. So this is a flexibility that microservices offer, technology stack selection. And usually what happens is products team will be separate, dashboard teams will be separate, orders payment teams will be separate. So there is a sense of anatomy amongst the team that they are getting to choose the stack for their services that they are working on. Okay, but it does not matter since everything works together as a single application to the outside world. For the outside world, it's not like there are individual services. Okay, if the user is interacting with a app built in microservices architecture, for him it's a single application and not individual services. Okay, but for a person, for the team, there are individual services and they have the ability to choose their own stack. So that is the best part of technology stack flexibility. Okay, testing complexity. Now, of course, with monolith architecture, there is only single app. So testing is relatively straightforward. You have to just write test cases. You have to do integration testing, unit test cases, end-to-end testing. Whichever approach you want to follow, you have to write code for that. Now over here, when it comes to microservices, testing in the beginning phases can be a little bit challenging because you have to write test cases for all these services that exist. Okay, and there will be inter-service communication that will be happening amongst different services. So you need to have some sort of contract-based testing as to how the communication, if the communication is working fine and all of that. So for that, so you need to figure that out. Okay, you need to figure testing different services. Okay, so there is a little bit of overhead, but in the longer run, okay, this is much more scalable provided your organization can invest in that. So that's about testing. Now coming to the next point, team autonomy. Okay, so here in monolith application, what happens is that all the team members of all the modules work together on a single application. So there is a little bit of coordination required. There needs to be release cycles which everyone agree on. If there is any bug in a particular module, the entire application has to be deployed and there has to be sign-offs, maybe from different departments, depending on your organization structure, right? But when it comes to microservices, okay, every team, teams working on different microservices are different. Okay, they have the autonomy to decide as to when they want to release. For example, dashboards dashboard team can have a monthly release cycle, a reporting team can have a weekly release cycle, and category team can have a bi-weekly release cycle, for example. Okay, so it's up to the team, and release cycles of each other does not impact other people's work. But over here, when it comes to monolith application, it is going to impact other people's work. Okay, if you want faster release cycles, maybe product team might not be ready with their features and they might want to have in the third week of the month. So all those things need to be coordinated. Okay, so team autonomy is one thing. Okay, and there is a good amount of team autonomy when it comes to microservices because it offers much more flexible approach because it's decoupled. Okay, then you have fault isolation and resilience. Now, when it comes to monolith application, if there is a single bug in the application, the entire application would crash, right? Of course, because it's a single application. But when it comes to microservices, if there is a bug in a particular service, only that service is affected. There can be strategies, you can have a circuit breaker and all of those strategies to prevent the other services from being affected from a bug in a single service, or if a single service is down or in maintenance mode. So all those strategies can be deployed over there, So fault toleration, fault isolation and tolerance is better when it comes to microservices. Okay, so microservices offer higher resilience and failures are isolated because of their decoupled nature. Okay, release and deployment frequency, I have already discussed this. So I think release cycles amongst the teams are much more flexible when it comes to microservices, and when it comes to Monolith, it's a single app, so every team, like all the team, the entire team has to coordinate amongst themselves. Okay, learning curve and onboarding. Okay, this is another point that comes in. Now, of course, if you're having a team, you're going to onboard new members, and there is going to be a learning curve for them as to how your project works. Now, when it comes to Monolith architecture, things are pretty much straightforward. You have a single app, and you get access to a single code base. You figure out, you might be having some internal documentation that you would be maintaining, and additional things you need to figure out. Okay, but when it comes to microservices, there is a little bit of a learning curve. So you might understand how one service is working, and you might want to also understand how others are consuming this particular service, or how services are dependent amongst each other. So there is a little bit of learning curve for new members generally, and there are also more new concepts involved when it comes to microservices, like how a service to service communication is happening, how this thing is happening, how async communication is working, where is Kafka. So all of that needs to be figured out in when it comes to microservices architecture. Then let's talk about operational complexity. So of course, operational complexity and DevOps needs. So Monolith is simpler, okay, goes without saying. But when it comes to microservices, you will have much more operational overheads for deployment, testing, and even you will have the need for DevOps over there. Okay, you will have you will need a dedicated infrastructure team as well, possibly. Okay, if developers don't know DevOps. So I've seen companies wherein developers also like touch upon DevOps part. Okay, for smaller startups. But for largest companies, there are dedicated DevOps and infrastructure engineer. Okay, so depending on your startup, this may vary. Okay, data management. Now, of course, Monolith application is having a single database, so that's absolutely okay. Or when it comes to microservices, it is going to have its own. Every service is going to have its own database and data store. So yeah, that needs to be managed, and all the database servers need to be managed by someone. So all those things come into play. Performance and latency. Now for Monolith, okay, everything works as a one process. So, it's all, if something is getting delayed, you optimize the code. Okay, you improve the code. If database calls are getting delayed, you figure out to write a best way. You figure out a better query for that, right? You optimize something of them. But when it comes to microservices, challenges can be different than Monolith. There can be inter-service communication and happening between two services, and the response of both the services is supposed to be sent to the end user, and there could be a network delay that might be happening, and because of that, the API call has become slower. So what should happen if there is a delay in API call? So all of these strategies, okay, come into picture. Like for example, you need to have a strategy on timeout. If one service is not responding, then how long should the other service wait if it's dependent on the response? So all those things come into play, and there are some strategies that you need to implement when it comes to microservices. Okay, monitoring and debugging. Now, monitoring and debugging in Monolith is straightforward. You will have to monitor just one service, okay, whether it's working fine or no. And if you want to debug, if you want to check logs, okay, you have to check it for only one service. Yes, there would be logs from all the places meaning all the modules, okay, but they will be at one place. Okay, but when it comes to microservices, logs and all will be on different services. So there needs to be a way that you need to figure out to aggregate all the logs, or you need to see like how you can have all the logs in a single view, right? So that is something that you need to do, and there are tools that help you implement distributed tracing, like log aggregation. There are tools like Grafana, Zepkin, already available in market. So all these things help you set up monitoring dashboards for microservices, and there's something called as Prometheus. So along with Grafana, you can have some cool dashboards set up for your entire architecture, and these dashboards can be used for monitoring. Okay, but for monolith application, things are much more simpler, and monitoring is fairly easy. Okay, so then we have cost. Okay, so monolith will be cheaper to build and run initially. It would also consume fewer cloud resources, and there is only one deployment that will be done. Okay, so it's cost effective in early stages. Okay, but later on it might not be cost effective. Okay, now microservices are more costly from the start itself because they need more infrastructure. You will of course have different servers. You will have different servers for different services, different database servers you have. So there are tons of services that are running. Okay, you might add more services, you might scale up, scale down. So this is there. Okay, there will be a little bit higher cost when it comes to microservices. But when things scale, for example, the example that I gave you, like there was a surge in search traffic and you had to just scale one service. So there was only cost for scaling that one service, right? But over here you have to scale the entire application, right? So it's much more costly at scale, but this is not that costly at scale. So that is something. So there are pros and cons of both. Okay, but initial setup over here it's like a tax, that you're paying. So you're paying a complexity tax is what I should say. Okay, to have things better in the longer run. So organizations should not adopt microservices architecture unless they are ready for all of this. Okay, so this is something there. Okay, cost, modularity and maintainability, of course, microservices win over here because of the modular approach. Scalability of development teams. Okay, this is important one. Now, in monolith application, you can have several developers. Let's say your application grew a lot. Okay, you are having now several developers. Okay, I just deleted this one. Okay, I just typed it out. So in monolith application, you're going to have teams working on different modules. Let's say your application grows, your team also grows. Of course, now with growing team, coordination can be much more difficult. Because some user is working, like there are 3 members working on different features within product module. There are 4 members working on different features within category module. So at the end of the day, they all are going to merge all the code base, and there could be a lot of conflicts that someone will have to resolve, right? And coordination amongst the team also becomes challenging. Things need to be much more streamlined. These things needs to be managed effectively. But when it comes to microservices, each service is going to have its own team. So okay, something happened over here, something broke. So each team is going to have its own thing over here, right? So each team will decide the framework. Okay, which tech stack they need to pick up, and if one service needs more members and other service does not need those many members, you have the flexibility of scaling up and scaling down teams, of course, which is also there over here in monolith application. But with microservices, there will be less overhead when it comes to team coordination. There will be less overhead when it comes to like resolving conflicts, merging code. So all of that, because the code bases are not getting merged among services. Okay, they all are separate code bases. So every team has that autonomy, So that's the benefit over here. And then if you scroll down, suitable for MVPs or startups. Okay, so monolith architecture is best if you're building MVP, like the first version of the product, minimum viable product. Minimum viable product is what I mean. Okay, so if you're building minimum viable product, which is MVPs, then monolith would be best to start with. Later on, you can scale and move on to microservices architecture. Even if you're a startup with limited budget and if you're figuring things out, it's best to go ahead with monolith architecture. Yeah, not microservices. So if you go ahead with microservices would be at that stage, I would say, over engineering. Okay, it's not needed. It's introducing unnecessary complexity into your organization, and you will be worried about infrastructure, cost, things more than your users. So in the early days of your startup, it's best to go ahead with monolith architecture. And then later on, if things go well and if you're ready to scale, you can switch over to microservices. So yeah, that's the evaluation, I should say, of monolith and microservices architecture. So see, I'm not saying one is better and other is not better. It's not that way. Okay, both are good, but depends on your organization needs. If you're a startup, you would say microservices are not good. Monolith is good for me. But if you are an enterprise with tons of users, a large team, then you would say, even if you have budgets, you're going to say microservices is going to be best for me, not Monolith at that stage. So it depends on which stage you are on. And that is why it's important to understand both. Okay, what are the pros and cons of both? Not just a single thing, because, depending on the stage, you will be choosing the right architecture for your organization. I hope this has been useful. Thank you.